Hey there, this video is about the 7artisans 14mm t2.9 Spectrum cinema lens. I'm testing this out on the RF mount on my Canon R5C, that's what you're looking at right now, and all the footage that you just saw was also filmed with that combination. Now 14mm is a really wide focal length on full frame because this is a full frame lens. So I want to talk about a little bit about my experiences shooting with 14mm and obviously get into talking about this lens in particular. So before we get into it though, disclaimer here that 7artisans did send me this lens to test and review, but they didn't pay me anything. They don't get to see this video before it gets posted, all the usual stuff. All right, so let's talk about this lens. One thing you might think about with such a wide angle lens would be vlogging, but you know, I don't think a lot of people are using cinema lenses for vlogging because there's no autofocus. Now, autofocus isn't so much a big deal here because I'm the same distance from the lens all the time. I can just set it and just leave it. This lens also is pretty heavy and there's no stabilization in the lens. Now I'm using this on the R5C and I have the digital stabilization turned off so you can sort of see what this looks like. And I am not a great vlogger and I'm shaking the camera pretty good. Also, I'm curious how it looks backlit and the flares. But just to give you a sense of that, of course, you do get some distortion when you are using such a wide angle lens and the subject is this close to the camera. But anyways, my hands are getting really cold because it actually is wintertime here in North Carolina. So I'm gonna go inside. All right, so besides vlogging, which I don't think you're gonna be using this lens for, what are some other situations where you might want a 14mm full frame lens? I think it'd be useful in real estate in some situations when you're just in really tight spaces or you're looking for a unique look to the image. I also do think that if you're doing some filming in very small spaces in general, it can be really handy to have such a wide lens when you can't move the camera back any further. Also, it does give you a pretty unique perspective and look, both in terms of being such a wide angle, and also when you get the subject really close to the camera, it does provide that weird and interesting perspective distortion, which can be cool and artistic in some different ways. It's also cool to just have a wide angle lens in your kit because things just come up and you need a wide angle lens, so it can be cool to have that. I also do think that this would be great on Super 35 or APS-C size sensors. I know this is a full frame lens, but if you put this on a Super 35 camera, you'll get 20 or 21mm full frame equivalent, which can be handy in a lot of different situations. All right, so let's talk about image quality. Now, I always like to include as much sample footage as I can, and that's why I opened this video with a bunch of sample footage that I shot in a town nearby. Now the lighting wasn't ideal that day, but it still, I think, looked pretty cool and I was able to test out the lens. Now it is really awkward shooting with a 14mm lens and I think it would take a lot more practice for me to get comfortable with it. I had to get so much closer to things that I'm used to, even with shooting like a 24. Of course, it is much wider, so framing and those sorts of things, you have to think very differently when you're shooting on 14. But this lens is, in my opinion, very similar to another lens that I've tested from 7artisans, which was the 50mm Spectrum lens for E-mount. I did a test and review on that, which I will leave linked down below. And I really love the image quality on that lens. The image quality on this lens, as I said, looks very similar to me. It is, the only way I can really describe it is it's very organic and very pleasing, kind of painterly. And I think it really does do a good job of sort of taking that digital edge off of these high resolution sensors. The Canon R5C, which is what I shot this on, was, you know, it's an 8K oversampled 4K. And when you put a really sharp lens on this camera, it makes it really, really sharp. So having something like this lens, I think it just looks really organic and pleasing, and I really do like the image quality. In terms of bokeh, I don't think you're gonna be thinking about a 14mm lens for getting really nice bokeh, but it does open to t2.9. And if you do get fairly close to the subject, you can get some out of focus areas, but it's nothing that you're gonna be using this for on a regular basis, but you can play with the depth of field a little bit. In terms of the flares, it does produce really unique and cool flares. And I think that's something that I love about the 7artisans lenses, is that they produce really cool flares and they're a lot of fun to play with. In terms of the focus breathing, it doesn't really have much focus breathing. And in this clip here, you can see that I'm racking from close focus out to infinity, which is right around there. And as I rack back in towards close focus, there really isn't that much focus breathing. So it is pretty well controlled on this lens, which is really good to see. In terms of distortion, looking here at my garage door, it is pretty well controlled, even getting pretty close to the subject. Of course, there's gonna be a little bit of distortion with a 14mm lens, but I think it is pretty well controlled. In terms of close focusing, this lens is rated at 0.4 meters or 1.3 feet. I think it performed right around there, and close focusing is not so bad on a lens like this. I do want to talk about some issues I had with the focus peaking on this lens, and I think a little bit had to do with just being such a wide angle lens and also some user error. When I went out to shoot all the footage you saw earlier on in the video, I really had trouble determining what was in focus. Pretty much everything looked like it was in focus with the focus peaking, so I wind up using the markings on the side of the lens to judge distance a lot of the times and just guess at the focus, but I think I did a pretty decent job. After I got home, I thought about this a little bit more, and I think part of the issues is that it's a very wide lens and pretty much everything's in focus unless you're wide open on the lens. But what I did do was I lowered the sensitivity of the focus peaking. That seemed to help a lot. So let me show you what I'm talking about with this focus rack. I'm starting here at close focus and going to infinity, and I think that's right around infinity, and then coming back towards close focus. It's kind of just tough to judge what's in focus, but I do think that lowering the sensitivity makes a big difference. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to manually focus with focus peaking and wide angle lenses. So let's talk about the build quality and the design of this lens. The build quality is absolutely phenomenal, as it is with all of the Spectrum cinema lenses from 7artisans. It comes with a metal lens hood, which is really nice. It has geared focus ring and a geared aperture ring here, and they are very stiff and very smooth. So what I noticed was it was a little bit hard for me to pull focus manually just by the barrel, but this would work really, really well if you had a follow focus or, focus mode or something like that on here. Now this does have a 270-degree focus throw, which is pretty long. And what I noticed while shooting with it is there's a lot of accuracy sort of towards the bottom end, like you can see here from 1.3 up to 3 feet. It is there's a lot of throw there, and then there's a lot less throw in the upper range, but just something to get used to and be aware of. But otherwise, I really do like the build quality of this lens. It is heavy, it is all metal, and it's really nice to use. Now onto the back here, you do have an all metal lens mount, but you do not have weather sealing. Now, one thing else I do want to point out about this 14mm lens is that it has an 82mm filter thread on the front. But what's amazing is that you can use regular filters because the front element does not stick out past the front edge of the lens. You can just use regular screw-on filters, so I think it's pretty unique for such a wide focal length, so that's really cool. All right, so let's mount up the lens because there's a couple things I want to point out about this. So let me take off the caps. So if we line up, of course, the red dot of the lens with the red dot of the camera, you can see right away that the label for the lens is already past where you expect it to be. So then when I click it on and lock it in, you can't actually see from the top which lens you're using. And that's because this is designed to be worked from the side as a cinema lens. So over on this side here, you have the lens label, so 14mm t2.9. You have your aperture mark right here, and then you have your focus mark up here. So you have all that, and then another indication which focal length you're using right here. So when you're using this from the side of the camera, you can definitely see what's going on. There are not markings on the other side if you have an AC or someone else trying to operate it from the other side, but you can definitely see them all from this side. So it's a little bit weird. I just want to point that out because when I went to mount the lens on the camera, I was like, I couldn't figure out what was going on because usually I'm used to the markings sort of lining up on the top. So in terms of the price, this lens is selling for $459, and it's available in 4 different mirrorless mounts. So it's available in L, Z, E, and RF. Now there are a few other lenses in this Spectrum set, and of course I mentioned earlier I did test out the 50mm t2.0 on E-mount. They're awesome because all of the lenses have the focus and aperture gears in the same spot, so it makes swapping out the lenses really easy. It is a really nice cinema lens set. Now the other lenses that you can get are a 35mm t2.0. Unfortunately, that is only available in L, Z, and E and not RF. That's selling for $419. The 50mm t2.0 is available in all 4 mounts, selling for $379. The 85mm t2.0 is in all 4 mounts and selling for $459. So one thing I would like to see would be a 24mm lens or somewhere around there in this set. I think that would really round out the set and make it a really viable option for a lot of people now that they have the super wide angle lens of 14mm. I would also like to see a 35mm that would be available in RF. So if you are in the RF world, you can get a complete set. In addition to that, I would love to see these lenses available in a DSLR style mount, like either an EF or a PL mount. That way you could buy it and then adapt it to any sort of situation that you're on. Because as of right now, these are all designed for mirrorless cameras, so you have to buy the ones that are specific to your system. Otherwise, great lens. Thanks for 7artisans for sending it out, and I will leave links down below if you're looking to pick this up. I really appreciate all of you guys watching. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next one.